Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Alison Fowler, who is Senior Director of Planning at Alisons. And today we're going to talk about a new approach to supply chain planning, how to address the white spaces in traditional planning processes. Now, one of the things that I've been talking about and writing about, over the past few years is how the clock speeds of, companies across all industries are accelerating, and how companies are struggling to realign their processes, their organizational structures, and their technology to keep up with this rapid pace of change. And this is certainly true with supply chain planning, where the complexity of the planning problems are only increasing, and the time horizons and the frequency that companies have, they have to do these planning processes on a much more frequent basis, is also part of the challenge. So what's the way forward with supply chain planning? Well, that's kind of the core question we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have Alison on the program, who's on the front lines of this there in her role at Lamasoft. So certainly look forward to her insights and perspective on what's happening in this market. So Alison, welcome to the program.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for having me here, Adrian.
Well, Alison, we've had many of your colleagues at Lamasoft here on Talking Logistics, but you're the first. This is your first time on the program, and like I always like to do whenever someone new comes on the program, I always just like to get a little bit of a sense of, how and why they got into this industry to begin with. So why don't you, briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Lamasoft.
Yeah, so I started my first journey into supply chain actually during undergrad. I was doing a senior design project for my engineering school with a food bank in the North Texas Food Bank in Dallas. And we were looking at streamlining and scheduling the pickups of the agencies that were coming to get food from the food bank. And we were also looking at warehouse design for them. So how to just optimize their warehouse design, optimize their pickups in order to get the most of the time in the space in the warehouse. And that was really my first entry into supply chain and logistics. I was studying, I went on to study get my master's in operations research. And throughout that time, I started an internship with Frito-Lay there in Plano, in Texas. And when I started to realize how impactful supply chain, everything in your home, everything when you go eat and in a restaurant, just everything you touch in your world, as we all know in the supply chain world, has been driven by a supply chain to get there to you. And so I just started to realize the impact of that, and worked at Frito-Lay for a number of years doing network design there, actually, with Frito-Lay North America. And then I moved on to a internal consulting team, basically a center of excellence at PepsiCo and PepsiCo Global, doing supply chain design work across Latin America and other countries throughout the world. For PepsiCo across different business units there, looking at mergers and acquisitions and manufacturing capacity planning type stuff. Then came to Lamasoft about 5 years ago and have done a number of things here. Really wanted to expand my horizon beyond just the food supply chain, working in oil and gas, tires, lots of different manufacturing companies, not just food. And then now, most recently, I am working as the Senior Director of Planning by Design here in our customer success team. So today I'm really all about trying to take our customers along this journey of, using, as we're going to talk today, using the design technologies and applying them in this planning space.
Yeah, no, that's a great journey that you've taken there. Starting with undergrad and then being in the front lines there with Frito-Lay and Pepsi, and now kind of more on the technology, and consulting realm. So certainly a good perspective there. And you've seen kind of how the whole thing has evolved over the past few years. So let's start, by talking about the traditional supply chain, planning process, which obviously was, part of what you've been involved with as part of your career. Which has always been challenging, but it is arguably even more challenging, today due to all the volatility in the market. What are some of the challenges or limitations that companies are coming up against today, and how are they currently addressing those challenges?
Yeah, so I think when we talk to customers about their planning systems and how they're using their planning systems, it all comes down to kind of the rigidity of those planning systems. And they've been stuck in a world of heuristics for a long time, and using those heuristics just isn't cutting it anymore in their planning system. So what I mean by that is, we find companies more and more saying, my planning system is solving the problem that it was put in place to solve, but it's not really answering the questions and solving the problems that I have today. So when you think about just the ever increasing changes between customer demands, supplier demands, regulations at every node in your supply chain, they have planning systems that can solve the decisions at each node, but having something that's really holistically looking at, all of those options, and on a week-to-week or day-to-day basis, being able to optimize those options is not really built into the way that the planning systems are built today. And so that's one of the things, kind of, getting out of this, the being stuck in a world of heuristics and, this rigidity, as well as with the rigidity, they aren't allowed to run a lot of scenarios, or it's difficult to run a lot of scenarios. So what we find is our customers are starting to, or for a while, have been creating the scenarios kind of one-off, external to the planning system. They have a number of spreadsheets. They have subject matter experts that can weigh in on this. But when you start to think about the massive amount of data that's needed to make these decisions and all the different options, again, the inability to use optimization, and then the inability to run scenarios in a really collaborative way outside of just a spreadsheet has been difficult for customers that are trying to solve those planning problems.
Yeah, no, I see and hear the same thing from the companies that I talk to. Going back to the comments I made in my opening comments, the rate of change is accelerating so much, and the types of problems that they're looking to solve, right? Or the planning processes that they've traditionally dealt with, is so different than what they face today. Even when things like, obviously, all the buzz around, e-commerce as an example, and multi-channel distribution, they're getting more stringent requirements from their customers, and they want to hold less inventory. The customers, they want more frequent shipments, or they want to be able to order in a more dynamic way, which is adding complications to the planning process. And exactly what you just said is what I see as well. Where they say, our tools really, just weren't aligned with kind of this way of working, and this way of these types of problems that we're dealing with. And so they find themselves, falling back on what I always talk about as the most popular supply chain tool on the planet, which is Excel, right? And using Excel to kind of fill in some of those white spaces or get some of those things done that they need to get done. But I think the challenge, to your point, is a lot of times you have to collaborate. You have to, share data and information. You have to, you need multiple voices involved in the process. It's just very difficult to do that with an Excel spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, right. Correct. Yeah.
So now, one of the trends that I've seen kind of related to this is that, over the past few years, is that, as companies have started to, treat supply chain, design as a continuous business process, right? As opposed to this, once a year or exercise or a project-based type of thing. It's really supply chain design has really become, over the past few years, for a lot of companies, a continuous business process. But as that's happened, it's kind of blurring the lines between design and planning. Do you see that happening in the companies that you work with? And what impact is that having on kind of organizational structures and kind of the technology needs?
Yeah, so I've seen that even with my colleagues that are still at my previous company, and then with all the customers I've worked with Lamasoft. So what we saw is, earlier in the space of supply chain design, people would, employ a technology or deploy a technology, or, get a consulting company even to come in and do a network design project. And what we've seen is a trend more from these projects, and this has been over even more the last 5 years, really, as, instead of just doing a project that was looking at my network structure, or, big long-term massive capital decisions, which people are still using design technology to do that. But what we saw is moving from that to a more ongoing cadence of decision-making with these technologies. So for instance, we saw companies start they were doing manufacturing strategy, long 5-10 year term manufacturing strategy with, annual based models and things like that. And then they started to realize, well, hey, can I use this same optimization technology to solve this on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis? And more we have a lot of customers doing that. And, so they're using that design, network optimization, inventory optimization, and transportation optimization, as well as simulation, to answer all of those questions monthly, weekly. And what that's done is really created not just a, one or two users of this desktop technology, but now they're moving to, a center of excellence, a group of people that are continually answering those questions. And as they deliver value, of course, the organization and the company around them starts asking them more and more questions, which means you need a bigger team and you need technology, to your point, different technology to help you solve those questions. And so around the technology side, we've seen companies looking at, how can I make this repeatable? What is the technology to enable me to make this repeatable? How can I then share it out with the different stakeholders? So again, getting outside of your one spreadsheet or just even your one supply chain design model, and saying, okay, now I need more stakeholders to weigh in on these decisions, and I want them to even be able to run their own scenarios. So what's really enabled that is cloud technology, being able to solve, hundreds of scenarios in the cloud, being able to automate the data side of things, and really bring that entire process as something that's just very repeatable and delivers a lot of value to the organizations that have these types of centers of excellence.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, I've seen the rise of center of excellence, growing, over the past few years as well. And you're right. I mean, I think that this whole process has become so much more collaborative and broader than just that one designer sitting in front of a desktop computer doing, models. This has truly become, as it's become a continuous business process, really become a team-oriented, multi-stakeholder oriented business process, where now, from a technology standpoint, how do you enable that, right? How do you provide the capability for multiple people to really weigh in and influence or help work on, the question at hand? What I attended your LlamaSoft's user conference, this past June, and one of the new concepts that was being discussed was planning by design, and which was described as building blocks to improve your current planning capabilities through design technology. So what does that mean exactly, and how is it enabled?
Yeah. So what we've basically done is, again, like we've been talking about, as our customers started pushing the supply chain design technology, again, the network optimization, inventory, transportation, and simulation, as they started taking those, algorithms and those techniques to solve these planning questions on a more frequent basis, we started calling that planning by design. So they're solving planning problems by using design technology. And so what we found is, the best way I like to start to kind of help people as an analogy kind of think about it is, you used to have, think about when you're driving somewhere. So when you used to drive somewhere, you relied on somebody to give you directions to get there, right? So you had kind of your SME, you had a subject matter expert that told you how to get there. Then, you also probably had a map, or you used one or the other or both. Sometimes, someone told you how to get there, you used a map, just a concrete static thing in your hand that didn't give you a lot of intelligence other than just the footprint in front of you. But now you have these navigation apps. We all have one. We don't even think about where we're going when we get in the car. And if you're going somewhere new, you don't even have to worry about it before you get in the car. You just put it into your navigation app. And so those apps are not only giving you varying options or kind of optimal paths, right? They're the different optimal paths to get where you're going, but they're also using intelligence beyond that, like traffic information, or something's changed along your route, just like in our supply chain, something's changed, and now I'm going to re-optimize for you and deliver a different plan to get there. And so we've really become very trustworthy of these apps, and they've really enabled us as the driver. And so that's kind of how we think about planning by design, is it's a way to give you more of this optimization technology that we've been talking about, optimization and simulation, into the hands of your planners that can then make better decisions and more rapid decisions. And as surroundings change, be able to react to those. And the technology, instead of having to go out and, call your friend or build an Excel spreadsheet and figure out how to get to where you're going, now the technology is just telling you before you even ask the question sometimes, right? So the optimization is telling you the answer before you even before you even ask the question. So with planning by design, the ability to take those techniques and deliver them and the decision-making power into the hands of the planner, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting was there at the conference, we talked about how historically, folks have kind of addressed those white spaces by putting together Excel spreadsheets or, other kind of non-scalable, poorly, poorly being able to collaborate, with those kind of methods and being able to actually build an app, right? I thought that was kind of the interesting thing is where that's kind of another trend happening in the technology space where you're now enabling the folks in the front lines to actually, develop, applications through very simple, tools. You don't have to be, a PhD in computer science or a software developer. Kind of leveraging kind of the simple, the tools that we use in our everyday lives, kind of being able to download an app. Or I know, just with even talking logistics, we use WordPress as our web engine, and it's very easy to configure the website. It's very easy to download an applet to enable some new functionality. And that seemed to be part of, from a technology standpoint, part of the path forward is being able to empower the end users of this to move away from spreadsheets and actually develop, through easy to configure, tools, kind of create their own apps that are now more scalable, more easily able to share with colleagues and so forth, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what planning by design is for us. They're able to, the user themselves, is able to build this app that creates an environment for their planners in the way that they want to look at it, right? So they're able to configure, the screen, the way they want the screen to work. They're able to configure the user experience when they click on a different button or a different screen, or they can do aggregation, disaggregation, the way they want to look at their data. And then, they can call on what we call events that you're able to go and use all of those design engines, like I mentioned. So all of the different technologies behind the scenes, now you're able to frame up this nice packaged app for the user to make those decisions.
Yeah, we've certainly come a long way in the overall software industry, and particularly enterprise software industry, and in particular, with this whole supply chain design and slash planning now. If you went back not too long ago, but certainly if you went back 10 years ago in the area of supply chain design, I think most people would have said, you needed a master's or a PhD in operations research, to be able to even just use one of those tools, which is why a lot of companies kind of employed consultants and those that kind of had that more expertise. And kind of fast forward to today, and now we're talking about apps and and easy to configure tools that are at the fingertips of the users in the front lines. And I think that's a broader trend that you're seeing across the enterprise software space, is making these tools easier to use, easier to configure, and really empowering the end user to kind of do what they need to do to get their job done day in and day out.
Yeah, it's really amazing when we've gone in and done our some of our prototyping and with our beta customers with this technology. What we've seen is just how rapidly they're able to build these apps. I mean, it's a tool for a business user, and we go in and they're able to just really, once you have that vision of what you want the end user to be able to do, I mean, configuring the app and building it is very quick. And the other valuable thing we see is that when you think about your planning systems today, when you have something you want to change, again, back to they're these heavy, rigid systems that serve the purpose they were, originally implemented to do, but now you have a changing dynamic, and you want to enhance that system. It can take a really long time, and you might have to compromise on some of the things that you're looking to do. And so what we're seeing with planning by design is it's this layer on top of that planning system to be able to go answer these questions really rapidly and really, and really fast to get your answers for your planners. So it's just this layer on top, and it's really amazing to see how quickly it can get the answers to the customers.
Yeah. So building off of that, I mean, can you share with us some examples of how companies are kind of using this approach to kind of address those white spaces in the current supply chain planning, application and process? And then again, what benefits are they achieving?
Yeah, so we have a large percentage of customers that are already doing what we're calling planning by design. So, and before, we didn't even really call it that. In the last couple of years, we've started saying, hey, you're using, network optimization to solve production capacity planning on a weekly basis. That's planning by design, and so a lot of it's just been us calling our customers and understanding all the different ways they're using our technology. So I'd say, capacity planning, whether that's production or distribution capacity planning, is one way that we see customers using, optimization a lot, and developing these solutions that are monthly or weekly, really supporting the end-to-end S&OP decision-making process. So we have companies that look at supply-demand balancing in our network optimization technology. We also are seeing anywhere, inventory optimization was something that, a lot of our customers are using. And instead of, a lot of times people are doing that in Excel spreadsheets, right? So they're setting their policies and even their inventory targets and then plugging them back into a, planning system or a system of record to go execute to. Well, our customers are using our multi-echelon inventory optimization to solve that problem, not just annually anymore, but monthly or quarterly, or depending on how frequent for their supply chain, it makes sense. And so now they're starting to take those inventory targets and run them very frequently and implement those back into their systems of record to go execute against. And that's a massive, area for a lot of companies. And even with the simulation technologies, on top of that, being able to simulate and help people understand, hey, if I'm going to reduce my inventory target, people start to get worried about service, right? So being able to go then simulate that and make sure that, you're still going to meet your service targets, and with all the different variability in your supply chain, still hit those. The other one we've had recently, a customer built an app to do transportation route planning. So we had a customer using our transportation optimization engine to do routes from the DC to the store. And so it's a retail customer, and they're using it, daily to run these routes. And so now they are able to, they built an app and they're able to use that app at the DC, and the person at the DC is enabled to go run these routes, run scenarios, make decisions on the routes on a daily basis. So really it's again, our customers have been doing it for quite some time, but now we're seeing with the ability to deploy these apps and get the decisions out in the hands of the customer, they're just able to answer more and more questions. And I will say the other thing is, even some of our apps and with our beta customers have been very just, hey, what's your unresolved planning problem, right? So what is that thing that bothers you? And so it's sometimes it's hard to put a box around it, right? There's so many different solutions that we've been seeing our customers come up with, and it's really inspiring and kind of up to the imagination, on what is that unresolved planning problem that you're trying to solve.
Right. Yeah, I generally refer to it as those white spaces, because I think, at the end of the day, people have all sorts of applications that are getting the job done in certain areas. But then there's just those pockets of processes or decision making that, the tool doesn't exist, right? Or they have to now kludge together information from here and here and here. And right now, to me, like the perfect test is if you have to kind of create an Excel spreadsheet to do something because application A and application B and application C can't do it, and you have to kind of figure out how to get your own process there. I think that screams to for an opportunity where you can develop something to help facilitate that white space. Alison, we're running short on time here, so probably just as a way to wrap up. I mean, what questions should companies ask themselves to assess whether they're ahead of the curve or behind the curve when it comes to bridging that gap between supply chain design and planning?
Yeah, I think if you are if you're looking for something, or you're finding yourself again relying on heuristics to solve decisions that are more and more complex. So if you're finding that there's a lot of complex trade-offs between things like your inventory versus your production plan versus your customer service levels. And so those complex trade-offs that you're looking at, if you're feeling like you don't have a really true, way to solve those and look at all of them at once, so you're looking at them in silos, or you just think that you need more of that optimization, and you're wanting to run scenarios. So if you're running scenarios in those spreadsheets, or you're running different analysis in spreadsheets, I think that's the biggest thing we've both been saying here, right? So if you have many spreadsheets and many one-off kind of analysis that are going on around the company, and you want something that is one center place for all of your stakeholders to be able to run scenarios, understand those outputs, and use the more advanced technologies around optimization and simulation, then that's something for you to start thinking about. So. Great.
Well, I think like I said, the pace of change is only going to continue to accelerate. So I'm sure that the way forward here is going to continue to evolve and change and shift. And, certainly that's going to be true in supply chain planning and design. And I know we'll continue to see those lines continue to blur, moving forward here. So, Alison, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics. But I think you provide some great insight and thoughts and advice, with regards to how to bridge that gap. So thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the LlamaSoft website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Alison, you can post it there, and I'm sure that she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.